There are moments in human history that we don't just call collapses. We call them the death of civilizations, because the destruction of a city is not the same as the collapse of civilizations all over the world. That's exactly what happened around 2200 BC. The Old Kingdom of Egypt, which built the pyramids, the mighty empire of Mesopotamia, the well-organized urban civilization of the Indus Valley. Even the early dynasties of ancient China fell into terrible crises at the same time. Today's science calls it the 4.2 Kiloyear Event, a global climate catastrophe, a prolonged drought, the changing course of rivers, the death of crops, the collapse of cities. But the strangest thing is, one of the oldest civilizations on Earth, the Sumerians, didn't just see this event as a natural disaster. They wrote, "The gods held a council before the destruction came. A meeting which supposedly lasted 3 years. A meeting where decisions were made which city would survive and which would be destroyed." This may seem like a mere myth, but the problem is, these stories weren't just passed down orally, they were written on clay tablets, and those tablets are still preserved in museums today. When archaeologists unearthed some Sumerian tablets from the ruins of southern Mesopotamia in 1893, at first no one could understand what they were written on, because the language was dead. But decades later, when the Sumerian language became available for translation, researchers found that these were not just religious poems. They contained accounts of meetings, debates, decisions, and planned departures. One of the most famous tablets is known as the Lamentations of Ur. At first, scholars thought it was just a dirge, a poem about the destruction of a city. But later researchers noticed some parts are written in an unusually administrative language. There is less emotion. Rather, there is the language of decision, as if someone is writing the minutes of a meeting. The tablet says, "The council of the gods met before the city of Ur was destroyed. The 4 main names present at the meeting were Anu, the supreme authority; Enlil, the head of the administrative power of the world; Nana, the protector god of Ur; and Ningal, the goddess whose city was about to be destroyed." The most terrifying part of the tablet begins here. Ningal, it is said, stands in front of the entire council and argues that Ur has fulfilled all its duties. The temples have been properly run. The rituals have been completed. The people were faithful to the gods. That is, Ur had done nothing worthy of destruction. And the strangest thing is, according to the tablet, Anu did not contradict his words. He admitted that Ur was faithful. He admitted that Ningal's reasoning was correct. But even then he said, "The decision has already been made." This one line alone makes the whole story terrifying, because here the destruction is not shown as a punishment. It is shown as a final decision. The plaque says that Ningal did not stop with one request. He went back to the council again and again. For 3 years. For 3 years the same request, "Let the city be saved." But each time the answer came, no. Then the gods began to leave. This is where the story becomes most uncomfortable, because modern archaeology says, the temples at the end of Ur were emptied before the destruction. No statues, no sacred objects, no administrative documents. But the strange thing is, these were not lost haphazardly like looting. Everything was removed in a very organized manner, as if someone knew in advance the city would not survive. When Sir Leonard Woolley was excavating the ruins of Ur, he noticed, below the level of destruction, there is a strange layer where the buildings are intact, but empty. As if the people did not suddenly flee, but rather planned to leave the city. And this part matches the Sumerian tablet. The tablet says, "The gods left the city before the destruction," and the soil says, "The most important things in the city were removed before the destruction." Now the question is, were these really gods? Or were the Sumerians talking about a ruling class who had information about the entire civilization? Because if someone knew, the crops were declining, the rivers were drying up, the food supplies were running out, then they would not need to make predictions. They could understand just by looking at the calculations. The collapse was coming. And maybe that's why the Sumerians wrote, The gods did not want to save the city. The fall of Akkad, the civilization we know today as the first empire in history, began not with a war, not with a bloody revolt. It began with a silent change in the sky. For the first year, people did not understand what was happening. The water in the Euphrates River was slightly lower than before, and farmers thought it was temporary. In the second year, the soil moisture decreased, and the wheat ears began to grow smaller. In the third year, water was delayed in reaching the southern canals. In the fourth year, the previous year's grain had to be removed from the city's storehouses. In the fifth year, for the first time, famine began in some villages outside the capital. And in the sixth year, for the first time, a word appeared on the administrative tablets of the empire: insufficient. That word was the first official announcement of the empire's impending demise. The Akkadians had developed the most advanced administrative system in the world. Every farm was kept in check. How much grain was produced in which region? How much water flowed in which canal? How much food was stored in which city? Everything was written on clay tablets. Thousands of scribes kept these records day and night. The empire's strength was not only its army, but its database. And that database was the first to realize that something terrible was happening. The agricultural lands of the north were slowly turning to dust. Sand blown by the wind was falling on the land as if the desert was slowly encroaching on civilization. Modern archaeologists later found that layer of dust, a dead layer 40 centimeters thick, as if the earth itself had once stopped breathing. It was at this time that strange changes began to occur in the temples of Ur. The priests suddenly began to keep much more records than before. They were recording not only religious rituals, but also the amount of food, the level of water, and even the speed of grain transportation to distant cities. In Sumerian society, the temple was not just a place of worship, it was the center of administration. Food was distributed there, lists of workers were made, agricultural plans were planned, and it was in those centers that the first panic began to arise. An ancient Ur tablet contains a line: "The river that once carried life now carries dust." At first, scholars thought it was poetic language. But later, geological analysis showed that at that time, the rivers of southern Mesopotamia had suddenly decreased in flow. The layer of minerals deposited on the riverbed showed that there had been almost no flooding for many years, and Mesopotamian civilization depended entirely on those floods. No floods meant no crops meant no armies meant no empire. But the common people still did not know the whole truth. The markets in the capital were still open. Music still played in the temples. Envoys still came to the palace. Civilization seemed normal at the upper levels. But inside, the numbers in the administrative records were changing. Food supplies were dwindling each month. The water in the canals was receding each season. And those who looked at those numbers understood that the situation would never return. This is why the Council of the Gods sounds so scary. Because if you remove the mythological language, there is an administrative reality hidden inside it. The Sumerians did not think of the gods as just supernatural forces. They considered them the real rulers of the city, the high priests of the temples, the high administrators, the food controllers. All were representatives of those gods. So when the tablet says, "The Anunnaki held a council," it probably means a secret meeting where the most powerful people in the empire sat and decided on the future. The fact that the council lasted for 3 years, this is the most strange thing, because it was not a sudden decision. It was the result of long observation. Someone kept saying that the situation could be saved. Someone was saying that new canals should be built. Someone was saying that grain reserves should be redistributed. Someone might be saying that the population of the north should be moved to the south. And the other side was saying it's all over. The drought will not stop, the rivers will not return, the empire will not survive. Reading the parts of Ningal's speech, one feels as if one is trying to save the system until the last moment. He keeps saying that Ur has done its duty. The temple is in order. The rituals are done. The people are obedient. That is, the problem is not inside the city, but outside, in the sky, in the climate, in nature. He wanted the council to intervene. But according to the tablet, the answer was always the same: the decision has been made. And then the most mysterious thing happened. The idols of the gods were removed from the main temples of Ur. In the eyes of the common people, this was the farewell of the gods. But in reality, it was the removal of the center of power. For with those idols were removed administrative documents, sacred tablets, accounting records, and important archives. Someone knew that the city would be destroyed, and the most important things were being removed before the destruction. When Sir Leonard Woolley excavated Ur, he found a strangely quiet layer beneath the last layer of ruins. There were no signs of war, no traces of fire. Rather, there was perfect evidence of abandonment, as if the people had planned to leave. There were cooking utensils, but no food. There are rooms, but no documents. There is a temple, but no idol. It is as if someone has already removed the soul of the city. This gives the whole story another dimension, because the collapse of normal civilization is seen as chaos. People flee, looting occurs, documents are scattered. But in Ur, there is an organized departure. Someone knew in advance how much time was left. And here is perhaps the most terrifying question. Did they really know the future, or did they just know the information? The same thing happens in the modern world. When the economy starts to collapse, ordinary people are the last to know. But the bankers, the administrators, the big corporations, they know it first. They move their wealth first. They get themselves to safety first. And the rest of the people still think things will be okay. For the Sumerians, it was the departure of the gods. But in historical terms, it could be an organized escape by the top administration of the civilization. Those who knew the system was going to collapse decided to save themselves before the last moment. And the ordinary people? They were still praying in the temples. They still believed that the gods would return. They still thought that the drought would end. But the river never returned. Then came the Elamite invasion. History books usually cite this as the cause of the fall of Ur, but in reality the Elamites only dealt the final blow. The city was dead from the inside. No food, no administration. The temple was empty. The gods were gone. The army was weak. The Elamites were just walking on the ruins. But Ningal did one last thing among them. He made sure that certain tablets would survive. The lamentation is not just a lament, it is a message. A warning for the future, as if someone were saying, we knew what was going to happen, we couldn't stop it, but we want the future to remember it. That's why so many copies of the tablet have been found. Copies of the same writing were hidden in different cities, because they knew that one city wouldn't survive, maybe none would, so the message had to be spread. And that message wasn't just about drought, it was about human decision. When a crisis comes, civilizations don't just collapse because of nature. They collapse when the powerful lose faith, when they decide to save themselves instead of saving the system. The Sumerians wrote that moment as the farewell to the gods, and thousands of years later, we sit with those same tablets in our hands wondering, did they really write about the gods? Or did they see something that every declining civilization eventually sees?